Hello everyone, and welcome to session 6 of our 7-part BizFlow enablement series. To recap, we now have a working form and process that have been mapped together, so employees can now go into the BPM portal and complete the performance evaluation process. In this session, session 6, we'll be taking the form that extra mile by applying UI and data logic to provide a better guided user experience for our end users. For example, one of the things that we're going to add is a total performance score calculation based off of the lookup values for the 3 qualifiers. And since AppDev utilizes open source technology, you don't need additional knowledge of proprietary languages or libraries. We're able to perform these relatively advanced calculations by simply leveraging our knowledge of JavaScript. With that, let's get into AppDev. Here we're in AppDev Studio, and opening up our form, as mentioned in our previous session, all the fields and sections are currently optional and visible and editable for anyone in the process. So starting with data logic, let's say we want to make the employee email field required, as in the employee will not be able to submit their form until they've entered their email address. So since this is a data validation, we're going to navigate over to the Universal Data Modeler to apply this configuration. As before, the first thing we need to do is open up our project and check out our data model. To make any field required, we're going to open the Validations modal by clicking on this V icon here. We can either search through the list of entities on the left to find the one we need. We can use these filters up top to narrow down our search. And what we're going to do is use the search feature to search for email. Select. And you'll notice that our email address entity already has a validation on it based on this blue V indicator. And that's because it's a string data type entity. And these entities will have the max length validation pre-selected based on the max character length value we define when creating them. So here we're going to give a description for the validation, and we're making this a required field. And to make a field required, all we need to do is select the required checkbox, and then define what message the form should display if the employee tries to submit without entering a value for this field. Now for the email address entity, let's say not only do we want to make it required, but we also want to specify what values are valid, in that it has to follow the conventional email structure with the @ and the .com, and we also want employees to be entering their corporate email address, not their personal Yahoo or Gmail. We can define all this here in the validations modal via the pattern validation. Now we can either select from a list of predefined validations, and here we have our URL, our number, our date, or we can apply our own. And as mentioned before, AppDev utilizes open source and common languages whenever possible, so patterns are actually built on regular expressions, and these can be quickly found via a Google search. And so since the email validation pattern is a commonly used regular expression, a simple Google search provided us with this email pattern. And with a few easy changes after the @, we made it so that users have to enter their corporate email address ending in @bizflow.com. We also want to define a message that should appear when the employee enters an email address that doesn't match this structure. So So that'll help guide the user as to why they're getting an error. So we're simply going to hit apply, and as you can see, the light blue V indicator is now changed to this dark blue, letting us know that there is actually a true validation on this entity now, not just a predefined one or pre-selected one based on the data type. And hit close. Now there's another major group of logic that can be applied in the data modeler called relationships. And these are used in data value comparisons and calculations. Quickly going back to the form here, to our studio, wouldn't it be nice if users could see their total performance rating score as they are populating the form? So for example, as I'm selecting my qualifier values, I could quickly see, either I've scored a 13 out of 15 or 14 out of 15, so I'm doing great. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, I've scored a 5 out of 15 and I really need to improve. So it's kind of a quick summary at the bottom, letting users know kind of from a holistic performance view, how are they doing? So to add this calculation relationship, let's go back to our Universal Data Modeler. And this time, we're going to click the R relationship icon to bring up our relationship modal. To create a new relationship, we're going to hit this plus icon here. And we're going to give our relationship a name and description. Now again, since we are calculating the sum of our 3 qualifier rating values, we're going to hit Add Calculation. And for calculations, we need to identify our source entities, which are the entities that will be feeding the calculation script, as well as the target entity, where should the output of the calculation display. In this case, as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 sources, and these are the rating entity, the rating fields for our 3 qualifiers. So we can search for them here on the left and drag and drop them as our sources. So we have our communication skills, our job knowledge, and our work quality. For our target, we want to display the total, the sum calculation, in the total rating field. So we're going to drag and drop it there. So now we've identified our sources and our target, and we've got 3 sources and 1 target. And if you noticed, as I was dragging and dropping each entity into their respective columns, AppDev actually assigns a letter indicator for each one. So rather than us having to reference the entity by its name, we can simply call this source.b, source.a, and source.c, and this would be target.a. So that's how we're going to refer to them in our script. And speaking of our script, I'm going to paste it here in our function section. And this has been created using common JavaScript, again, making use of open source and common languages whenever possible. And so quickly reviewing our function here, you'll notice once again we have 3 sources, source.a, source.b, and source.c. The dot value is simply because these are lookups, and so it's letting the function know to grab the value behind the lookup label. And we also want to display the total sum as a fraction over 15, since that's the highest possible score. As our target, we're going to hit this drop-down, select our target.a. To apply, again, we simply need to hit apply, and you'll notice that the relationship then gets added to the list on the right, and then we're going to hit close. From here, those are all of the data logic types that we wanted to add. So we walked through adding validations as well as relationships. So let's save and publish our data model. And we'll go over to Studio to see how they're looking using our preview function. In Studio, we can open up the form in preview mode via the preview icon. And here, we can verify our changes to the data model. First, we can immediately visually see that our email field is now required based on this asterisk indicator next to the field label. We can also test it out by trying to submit our form without entering in a value. As you can see, this triggers the required field modal, which actually takes us directly to the required field if we click on the field name. This way, we don't have to scroll through the form trying to find our required fields. And we also see the message we defined in our validations modal, this field is required, being displayed under the field's UI component per our selected layout configuration. And as we start typing into the email field, we can also verify that the pattern validation is working per the message pop-up notifying the users that they have to enter their corporate emails ending in @bizflow.com. And the message will stay there until we satisfy the condition. Scrolling down, we can test out the auto calculation of the total performance score as we select values in the drop-down fields. And right now, it's just there to visually notify users of their total performance score, but we could further enhance this field to be used to, trigger a pop-up modal, alerting employees that they're maybe below a critical score. And we could also present them with some resources they could use for further career and skills development. We could also tie this value to our process definition to trigger another gateway or another sub-process to send the evaluation to a separate set of approvers. So now that we've verified our data validations and relationships, let's close out of preview mode. On the Studio, we can add and control UI logic such as show, hide, and disable via the Condition tab on the right. This UI logic can be tied to different variables, but in this session, we're going to walk through applying the disable and show hide logic based on the process activity name as well as based on another field's values. First, let's take a look at our Manager Review field set. As we discussed during our previous session, we don't want our employees who are initiating the form and doing their self-assessments to see this section. In fact, the only time this section should display is during the Manager Review activity. So in this case, we want to tie the show hide condition logic to the activity name variable, which we can do using AppDev's reserve words. We can find these reserve words in the form callback and in the state and RState panel on the right. Let's find the reserve word that references the activity name. And now that we've found it, we simply need to dot walk it through its parent words, which gives us rstate.wihcontext.activity.name. So now that we have our reserve word, we're going to close out of the form callback. We're going to select our Manager Review field set, open the Condition tab on the right, and expand the Display None section. Here I'm going to paste our script. And as you can see, we have our reserve word. We have the logic defining is not equal to, and our activity name, Manager Review, which we can get directly from our process definition in BPS. Going back to Studio, to summarize, this statement reads as follows. If the activity name is not Manager Review, then trigger the display none, hiding this field set. This effectively hides this section for all roles except the manager. To apply, we're going to hit the blue Apply button, And now that we know how to show and hide based on our activity names, let's walk through how to do something similar, but based on another field and entity on the form. And for that, we're going to use these two entities here, the recommended for promotion and recommendation reason. Now, right now, these two fields always display on the manager review field set, but realistically, the recommendation reason field is unnecessary unless the manager recommends the employee for a promotion. So we want to hide the recommendation reason field unless the manager selects yes here. So to apply that logic, we're going to select our recommendation reason entity. And again, this is a display none type condition, but this time we're going to find the related recommended for promotion entity from the project schema tab on the left and drag and drop it to the drop entity here zone on the right. And just like when we were creating our calculation in the Universal Data Modeler, doing this assigns an alias to the entity that we can use in our script, which I'm going to paste now in the display none. And as you can see, I need to modify the data.alias to match the one that we have here. And as you just saw, the red X error alert just went away. So to summarize, this statement reads as follows. If data.c, which as we know is the recommended for promotion entity, so if the recommended for promotion field is blank or the value is not yes, then hide this field, trigger the display none. So I'm going to hit apply again. Now we would apply both of these two scripts, the one we just applied to the recommendation reason field, as well as the one we applied to the manager review field set, to the HR review field set below as well, but I've gone ahead and applied them prior to this session for the sake of time. So let's make sure to save our changes to the block, which we can do via this green Save Block button at the top of our Embed Block component. Lastly, let's walk through how to disable sections of our form. For this, we'll use the employee field set. And it's very similar to how we applied the display none, but this time we're going to expand the disabled section under the condition tab. And for our employee field set, we want to make sure that it's only editable for the employee who initiated the process and is doing their self-assessment. Since this is again tied to the activity name, we're pretty much going to use the same script that we used for the manager review field set, including the same R-state reserve word, but we're going to change the last part of the script, the activity name, from manager review to initiate evaluation. And again, we can always refer back to our process definition for our activity names. Here I'm going to hit apply and save our changes. And for the sake of time, I've already applied the same logic to the performance, achievements, and goal field sets below. Now that we're done making changes to our form, we need to publish the project again to make the latest version available for our users on the BPM portal. Last time, we were publishing our form for the very first time, so we used the publish icon. We could technically use the publish icon again, but that will generate a new URL for this form. This means that we would have to update the application in BPS, since it would then be using the old URL. Rather than doing all this, we can use the publication history icon to simply select our last publication and overwrite it to keep the same URL. Again, as best practice, we recommend updating the tag and adding to the description to keep track of the changes that have been made. Now that we've published our changes, it's time to test them out. Here, I'm logged in as an employee in our BPM portal. So I'm going to open up a process I just initiated. And again, we can see that our data logic changes were successfully published based on the required asterisk on the email field. And as we enter our email, we get the pattern validation message. Scrolling further down, we're still able to enter our performance scores. And doing so, we can see that the total is updated based on real-time selections. And even further down, we can see that since we're at the Initiate Evaluation activity, we no longer see the Manager and HR Review field sets. To see them, we'll have to submit our form, log out, log back in as the manager, and open up the submitted request. So now that we're at the manager review step, all of the employee entered self-assessment fields are locked down for review only, and I can access and add my comments to the manager review section. Now, just for testing purposes, let's submit this form as a manager, log out, log back in as the HR specialist, and open up the request in the monitoring window. So here in the end-to-end process map, we can see that the AND gateway is working as expected by holding the process in place until both the manager and HR specialist are done with their review. Closing out of this window and opening up the form itself, we can see again that all of the employee self-assessment fields are still disabled, and this time, instead of the manager review field set, we see the HR review one. And also, by toggling the selection for the recommended for promotion field, we're able to show and hide the recommendation reason text field. With that, that takes us through the end of section 6. So as always, let's recap this session and then review our next one. So in this session, session 6, we took our AppDev performance evaluation form and we walked through how to add data and UI logic to it to give it a much more guided user experience for our end users. In our next session, session 7, which is also the last session of our 7-part BizFlow enablement series, we'll be walking through the process of committing the AppDev form data to an external database table. With that, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all in our next and last session.